Without doubt, one of the most magical and hidden corners of our world lies on the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Especially as you go south of Yosemite and Mono Lake on Highway 395, for more than 150 miles there are no further roads across what is known as the High Sierra. The area thus has remained isolated and sparsely populated, with the main towns being Bishop, with only 4,000 people, and Mammoth Lakes with only slightly more. We had been invited by our friends George and Carrie, who live in Bishop, to join them and a small group of mutual good friends on a pack trip into the High Sierras. It had been years since we'd done one, and we jumped at the chance, especially since George was insisting on doing all of the organizing. We showed up at their beautiful house in the afternoon, and after repacking our gear, we enjoyed a great meal and headed off to bed so as to get an early start that next morning.
Nothing seems to matter now that you're here beside me. When I'm here with you, I feel alive.
And we were off, driving 1 hour south to Lone Pine, then turning east. It was an abrupt 6,000 feet up on one of the most amazing roads imaginable. Back in 1929 to 31, when most of the work was done, the locals dreamed of bringing tourists across the Sierras. Disney was going to build a ski resort, creeks would be diverted to create man-made waterfalls, they would build a tram to the top of Mount Whitney. There was no end to the dreams of the day. But it was never to be, hallelujah, and what we have today is the world's most impressive and expensive access road to nothing more than a trailhead. The parking lot is at Horseshoe Meadows, and a number of hikes are possible from here. We chose to explore the Cottonwood Lakes, which were only a few hours' hike away. We would set up our base camp at the aptly named Hidden Lake. From Horseshoe Meadows at 10,000 feet, it was a leisurely 3-hour hike into Hidden Lake at 10,850. It was such a gradual ascent that it didn't occur to me until later how smart, quote unquote, we'd been to spend the one night acclimatizing in Bishop. Getting to Hidden Lake required a short half-mile or so cross-country hike, but it was worth it, as we had it completely to ourselves for the entire stay. One cannot imagine a more idyllic setting, right down to the 2 resident families of ducks. Even though we shared in the cooking, George had bought and planned all the meals, and in addition, he provided all the tents and sleeping bags and kitchen gear. Having chosen an excellent camp spot, our laughter rang through the forest as it felt we were back at summer camp, except that this one had adult beverages. With George and Carrie doing a second run back to Horseshoe Meadows for additional supplies, the rest of us, with a curious marmot monitoring our discussions, divided into 2 groups, with Brian, his son Ben, and Pam climbing 12,900-foot Cirque Peak. You can see their route up and back via 12,300-foot New Army Pass in blue, and our much more relaxed loop hike in red, which took us off trail to visit Muir Lake on the return. The Cottonwood Lakes are part of the Golden Trout Wilderness, and are protected as a special breeding reserve for these magnificent trout, which are the state fish of California. Eric had brought all of his fly fishing gear, and although I didn't stick around long enough to take a picture of those that he caught, they are renowned for their beautiful bright coloration and for putting up one heck of a fight. It was a strictly barbless hook, catch and release affair. Leaving Eric to his fishing, Neil, Barb, and I climbed a bit higher into the upper cirque, and after a leisurely lunch, we decided to return cross-country. It was a great decision, as we were treated to a magical afternoon, which made us question why we don't just spend the entirety of every summer enjoying the High Sierra. The primary tree species here was the foxtail pine, which only grows in the Sequoia-Kings Canyon area. It's what's called a tree-line species. That is, it grows on the very edge, beyond which it's too cold and dry for any tree to live. They grow slow and live to be over 3,000 years old. Incredibly resistant to fire and insects, the main cause of death is lightning strikes or avalanches. Even dead, the trees go on to exist for hundreds of years as magnificent sculptures. We all commented on how they exuded a certain regalness. As hoped, we popped out just above Muir Lake, which was gorgeous and offered a perfect beach to swim from. We were amazed that such an idyllic spot had no other visitors, but then we took notice of a potential reason why: smoke coming from the southeast. From that day forth, we saw the helicopters ferrying back and forth between the lakes and the fire, and we later learned almost 400 acres had burned and had required over 400 firefighters to contain. But that morning, everything seemed fine, so we all took off on a fantastic hike straight up to the ridge behind our camp. George had heard that in the canyon on the far side, there was an area where we might see big-horned sheep. We continued up to the top of the canyon, and George, who went further than everyone else, did see some. We returned over a small pass with glorious views down towards the Cottonwood Basin, with the group splintering as they chose their own route back. Waking that next morning, it was obvious another day of glorious weather was upon us. We had decided to head back up into the Cottonwood Lakes for the day, with Ben and Eric eager to take a stab at riding rather than walking. There was a bittersweet aspect to the day, since Barb and I were headed home tomorrow, one day before the rest of the group. We had no ambitious plans, aside from just enjoying the Sierras, and as John Muir said, allowing nature's peace to flow into us as sunshine flows into the trees, while letting our cares drop off like autumn leaves. For any of you who have never been packing before, I obviously highly recommend it, and there are plenty of pack stations to choose from along the east side. It makes camping in the Sierras ridiculously easy.
Tell me about today.
Today
Was pretty good.
Horses.
was the yesterday you worried about tomorrow. No, tomorrow was the yesterday you
Time
worried
traveler.
today. Yesterday was the today.